At 6:30 a.m. on August 27th, at the African Development Summit in Addis Ababa, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso stepped to the podium with the weight of history on his shoulders and delivered words that would reverberate across every continent. Mr. Netanyahu, you have 48 hours to apologize to Africa, or you will no longer be welcome here. The ultimatum came after leaked reports from diplomatic sources revealed that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had allegedly made deeply offensive remarks about African leaders during a closed-door G7 meeting, particularly targeting Traoré himself, dismissing African leaders as political opportunists and naive regarding Israel's Gaza campaign, with the leaked language being even harsher behind closed doors, including terms like crude and militantly theatrical to describe Africa's response. While Netanyahu also reportedly hinted at supporting tighter IMF debt recovery across African nations and floated ideas about creating new Western-sponsored alliances that could sideline Africa's interests entirely. When the leak broke, outrage swept across African media and social networks, with the hashtag Africa is not your pawn trending globally and generating millions of shares. Yet while public anger reached a boiling point, Traoré chose strategic silence, a deliberate quiet that would make his eventual response even more powerful. At just 35 years old, this military leader was already governing a country where over 2 million people had been displaced by jihadist violence, and more than 60% of the territory lay outside direct government control. Yet his approval ratings had soared to an unprecedented 66% compared to only 24% support for military rule in 2012, as his people saw him as a modern-day Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who once dared Burkina Faso to invent the future. Traoré had earned this comparison through bold domestic reforms that strengthened his moral authority, nationalizing gold mines to break foreign control, building Burkina Faso's first gold refinery to add value to their resources, distributing tractors to farmers as part of his push for agricultural self-reliance, and consistently championing the principle that Africa must control its own destiny rather than remain dependent on external powers. When he finally broke his silence at the Addis Ababa summit, standing before the cameras of the world with unwavering resolve, his voice carried not just personal conviction, but the accumulated dignity of an entire continent. Mr. Netanyahu, Africa will not be your pawn, nor the subject of debt chains or Western-sponsored experiments. This is not a game of alliances, it is a question of dignity. You have 48 hours to apologize, or you will no longer be welcome on this continent, not in trade, not in diplomacy, not in the future we're building. The conference hall fell into stunned silence. Journalists stopped typing mid-keystroke, and delegates stared in disbelief as they witnessed something almost unheard of in modern diplomacy. An African leader refusing to soften his words, hedge his demands, or bow to the pressure of global power dynamics. As the 48-hour countdown began, the world's reaction was immediate and electric. Social media platforms exploded with support across Africa and beyond, with South Africa's foreign minister sharing the viral clip and writing, "Finally, someone said it." Student unions from Senegal, Ghana, and Nigeria issued joint declarations urging the African Union to stand with Burkina Faso, and demonstrations broke out not only in Ouagadougou, where thousands chanted, "Long live Captain Traoré," but also in cities with large African diaspora communities like London, New York, and Kingston, where protesters waved Burkina Faso's flag and carried banners demanding an end to foreign interference in African affairs. The response revealed something profound that had been building for decades. Millions of Africans across the continent and around the world had been waiting for exactly this moment, for a leader who would stand up without equivocation and declare that African dignity was non-negotiable. In Burkina Faso itself, despite the ongoing security challenges that had claimed over 7,200 lives in the past year alone, people gathered in public squares holding banners reading, "Africa stands with Ibrahim Traoré," and "Respect Africa," while even opposition figures who had been vocal critics of his military-led rule found themselves hesitating to criticize what felt like a moment of genuine national pride and continental unity. The impact rippled through diplomatic channels as rumors spread that Israel was quietly reaching out to multiple African capitals, sending private feelers through intermediaries in search of back-channel discussions, with no press releases or admissions of error, only vague phrases about clarifying misunderstandings. But the timing told the story. The ultimatum was working, forcing one of the world's most entrenched powers to pause and reconsider their approach to Africa. Beyond the immediate diplomatic maneuvering, Traoré's stance sparked deeper conversations across the continent. As parliaments in several countries began reviewing trade agreements with Israel, governments in South Africa, Namibia, and Tanzania suggested continent-wide reassessments of diplomatic priorities, and regional alliances like ECOWAS started debating whether to take stronger collective foreign policy stances, all sending a clear message that African nations should stand united, not only in trade and economics but also in questions of dignity and respect on the global stage. When the 48 hours passed without Netanyahu's apology, many observers expected disappointment or backing down, but instead something more powerful emerged: the realization that the ultimatum had already succeeded in its deeper purpose. Traoré had not merely been seeking an apology from one leader. He had been asserting a fundamental principle that would outlast any single diplomatic exchange: that African dignity is non-negotiable, that respect cannot be optional, and that the continent's leaders have every right to demand equality in international relations. The true victory was not whether Netanyahu apologized, but that one unwavering voice standing alone at a podium in Addis Ababa had shifted the global conversation about how Africa should be treated, redrawing the boundaries of acceptable diplomatic behavior and giving the continent a striking example of what it means to speak with moral authority. Leaders across Africa, who had once distanced themselves from Traoré's firebrand rhetoric, began citing his stance with respect, understanding that he had set a new standard for African diplomacy that prioritized principle over convenience. This moment transcended the immediate political drama to become something deeper and more lasting, a mirror in which Africa saw its own strength reflected, from the hands of farmers in rural villages to the voices of students in universities, from traders in busy markets to community leaders in townships. Everywhere people spoke with renewed pride about what it meant to be African in the 21st century. Traoré's words resonated because they carried the weight of centuries, the unbroken line of Africans who had fought for freedom, justice, and equality, from the anti-colonial struggles of the past to the challenges of sovereignty today. And his message was as simple as it was revolutionary. We do not ask for permission to be free. We rise to claim it. The 48-hour ultimatum lasted only 2 days, but its impact will echo for generations, serving as a defining moment when a young African leader looked at the most powerful forces in the world and declared with unwavering conviction that Africa would no longer accept being treated as a subordinate, that the continent's leaders were equals on the global stage, and that dignity, respect, and sovereignty were not privileges to be granted by others, but rights to be claimed and defended by Africans themselves.